International relations expert Thembisa Fakude wrote an opinion piece looking at the mutiny by the Wagner Mercenary Group against the Kremlin. It also looks at the impact this will have on the war in Ukraine and the geopolitics in sub-Saharan Africa. Thembisa Fakude joins us now for more on his opinion piece and thinking on these developments. Mr. Fakude, thank you so much for joining us once again. Now, the Wagner Group is said to be made up of 50,000 personnel, 10,000 being contractors and 40,000 being convicts of Russian prisons. Where did the break in relationship between Russia and Wagner begin?
Well, the break began when the Russian military stopped providing arms to the Wagner Group, who continues to fight in Ukraine. And there's been a number of reports of the Wagner Group complaining about the lack of arms coming their way, and as a result, them suffering huge losses in terms of soldiers who are currently fighting in Ukraine. So that's where the current standoff actually started. So today we saw a different position from that which we have gotten used to of normally posting messages on social media. There was actually a movement from the Wagner Group, and they threatened that they were going to go to Moscow in what they called the March for Justice.
Now, this group is also very synonymous with brutality and ruthlessness. What do we know about their dealings and presence in Africa?
Well, they're mercenaries. They're soldiers of war. They've created instability in many countries in Africa, particularly Central African Republic, in Sudan. They're involved in Mali. They were involved with Khalifa Haftar in Libya. So they're business people, and they are all about fighting in return for money. Notwithstanding that mercenaries are outlawed in Russia, but Vladimir Putin overlooked the existence of Wagner Group for a very long time, and they've proliferated into what they've become, and now they are seeking more power and recognition in Russia for their contribution, particularly in Bakhmut in Ukraine. After that, over 6 months of fighting, eventually they managed to take over the city, and now they see themselves as worth of being recognized and being provided more with arms.
Now, with this mutiny that they have now put onto Russia, experts have predicted that this could be a gain for Ukraine. But what does this then mean for those countries that you mentioned, Mali, Libya, and CAR in Africa?
Well, it's going to be a gain for Ukraine because, one, if Wagner Group collapses, it means, therefore, that Ukraine will, with its counteroffensive that has been announced, will continue regaining some of the territories that they've lost since the war began on the 24th of February in 2022. In Africa, of course, it means something else. It means that the approachment of Russia and African countries is likely to stall. The countries that are likely to be impacted by this will be mainly Sudan and Mali. Mali in particular, because you know that Mali has since banned or kicked out the UN peace mission forces, and those were replaced immediately by the Wagner Group. So if Wagner Group ceases to function properly, not only in Russia but also in Africa, chances are Mali will be back to square one in terms of it tackling the Al-Qaeda or ISIL in that country. In Sudan, we know that the Wagner Group has been working very closely with the Rapid Support Forces led by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. So if, again, those working relationship collapses, you are likely also to see the easing of the conflict in Sudan. So the intervention or the involvement of Wagner Group in Africa has not been constructive in any form, but it has been meant to destabilize many countries. And I think if it does collapse, one, you're going to see the rapprochement of the Russian foreign policy losing steam. But importantly, you might just see many of these groupings that are supported by the Wagner Group in Africa losing steam and also collapsing as a result.
I mean, we've heard earlier on from a Malian political analyst saying that the absence of the Wagner Group will create a security risk for that country.
Yes, indeed, because you've got two major powers that have since withdrawn. First you had the French that left Mali, and they were replaced by the UN peace mission, by the UN peace mission force. That also was asked to leave the country, and they were replaced by the Wagner Group. So indeed, if the Wagner Group leaves, you are likely to see Al-Qaeda or ISIL coming back, getting emboldened, and continue to create havoc and chaos in that country. But it is not because of the Wagner Group that we're going to have this situation. This situation was created by the Malian government, who decided to kick out the legitimate or internationally recognized peace mission forces in Mali, and replacing them by the soldiers of fortune and mercenaries in the form of the Wagner Group. If they do leave, Mali might just have to once again either go to France to request assistance, or they might have to find themselves going back to the United Nations to request the assistance of the United Nations to come back to maintain peace in that country.
So lastly, Mr. Fakude, what can these African countries do in the absence of the West, in the absence of Russia, in the absence of so many of these external forces coming into their nations and exuding force in terms of how they should be running their countries? How do you believe Africa would be able to take back its own power with regards to especially regions such as Sudan as well as Mali that are facing such conflicts?
It's quite a difficult one, but I think the first step will be to resist this temptation of allowing these paramilitary forces to exist alongside the national armies in the name of trying to maintain peace, because we've seen it happening everywhere, or in many countries where there's conflict in Africa. Number two is to appeal to those countries that continue funding these paramilitary armies outside the Wagner Group. In Sudan, we've got the RSF, for example, that's creating havoc, to stop funding these groupings, so that you can have one army recognized by the state and doing the work that is supposed to be done on behalf of the people. But as long as you have these other stakeholders getting involved alongside the paramilitary groupings in African countries, particularly formations such as the Wagner Group, you are continually going to see this instability that we've witnessed over the years in Africa.
All right, Mr. Fakude, always a pleasure having you and giving us your insights on the show. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. That was international relations expert Thembisa Fakude speaking to us there about the mutiny that's currently taking place by the Wagner Group in Russia.